also joining the show, NFL draft expert Russell Brown.
The man, the myth, the legend, the car puncher, the man himself.
What up, Russ?
Fellas, how are we?
We're good. We're good. How you feeling?
How
man?
are you?
It's draft week. I feel like I haven't slept. Got a pounding headache, but we're out here doing this thing. So I'm excited to talk real ball with the goats themselves, the heavyweights. I'm the junior heavyweight. We're live and in person. Let's do this thing.
Hell yeah. Getting down to the nitty-gritty couple days here. So we talked about it earlier. I don't know if you heard, but there were reports that Jalen Carter is off of the Detroit Lions draft board, and he has been for about a month. So are you buying into that? Could you see the Lions passing on Jalen Carter if he's sitting there for them at 6?
Yeah, I absolutely can see them passing on him. I would be pretty stunned at this point if they actually did end up taking him. Now, obviously, anything could happen, and if it came down to some type of vote or something like that, and you get 2 out of 3 votes or 3 out of 5 votes or whatever the case might be, if you get enough votes and it says, hey, we got to take this kid, then obviously I could see them taking him. But ultimately, I think at this stage in the game, I really think that he's off the board, and the players that they're targeting are Will Anderson, who's at the top of the board of probably every team out there. And ultimately, I think it's down to some type of corner of Devin Witherspoon or Christian Gonzalez, and then probably Peter Skoronski.
It's Peter Skoronski?
Look, man, it's it's an interesting one, but he's been discussed, and he's a player that fits kind of what they look for. Good football player, loves the tape, loves to grind, technically sound, gives it everything he's got. And when you look at what this regime's trying to build, I mean, Peter Skoronski could be a guard at the next level. They have a potential need at right guard, regardless of the additions that they have. And ultimately, when you look at it, he might be a 10 to 12-year pro. When you look at just the technique and the consistency, it's not sexy by any means at 6, but it's a pick, could make some sense. And I wouldn't be surprised if on Thursday we see a run on offensive tackles, and I had 4 offensive tackles ranked with first-round grades in the top 15 of my big board. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw 4 offensive tackles go in the top 15 and potentially 2 in the top 10.
Russ, is there any legitimacy to the Tyree Wilson hype? Because I look at the comparison some people are making to try to make a sense is like Trayvon Walker of last year. But Trayvon Walker had the combine to grow through. Like, this guy, Tyree Wilson, really owns the game tape. I don't think he's ran at the pro day or done anything at the combine to warrant any of this hype. I mean, we just looked at the FanDuel. He has the second best odds to go number 2 to the Texans, or just number 2 in general. Mm-hmm. Is there legitimacy to that, or is this is madness?
No, there's legitimacy there. I think a lot of people look at him and say, well, there's a really high ceiling with him, and there's a lot of potential with him, and that was kind of the same thing with Trayvon Walker. Now, I have a preference. I would take Will Anderson. I think he's been a heck of a lot more consistent over his college career than Tyree Wilson, but I can see why people are up in arms over Tyree Wilson and why they like him. I mean, he's a high-effort player. He leaves it all on the field. He's got that great motor. He's very versatile. He can play as a 4-eye technique. He can stand up off the edge, and you just look at his length. I mean, his wingspan is 7'2". He's got almost 36-inch arms, and at 6'6", 271, he fits so many different schemes, and he is scheme versatile, and so I think he fits a lot of different places. And I could see, D'Amico Ryans falling in love with that type of player. I could see the Houston Texans falling in love with that type of player, especially with some of the background of the front office coming from New England. New England was, famous for taking 6'5", 270, 280-pound defensive, lineman, defensive tackle type hybrids and playing them off the edge. And Tyree Wilson could kind of fit there. So he makes a lot of sense. The thing that's really holding him back is that coming off of a fractured foot, he hasn't been able to test, and that's the downside to him. So we'll kind of see. I don't think he'll go at 2. I think there's potential there at 3, potentially to Arizona. He makes sense for Seattle at 5, but ultimately I could see him being the pick at 8 to the Atlanta Falcons.
I don't hate that at all, and I don't know. Me and Easy have been struggling with that kind of the overhype of the Tyree Wilson, because how I see it is he's a solid player. I think he'll be a solid pro for a long time if he measures out to what he's expected to be. But a guy like Will Anderson could be dynamic, could be your game changer. And we've seen a couple mock drafts now of him falling to the Lions. We've heard Terry Foster say he is their dream scenario. You yourself just said he's the top of their board too. No one's, surprised as he's the top of somebody's board. Is it a real possibility that Will Anderson falls to the Lions at 6, or is that just a shot in the dark?
It's very possible. I mean, obviously, we would need a run on quarterbacks to happen, and we would need the Seattle Seahawks to ultimately take, a defensive tackle like Jalen Carter, and really, if it goes Houston with, Tyree Wilson or Will Levis, I could see Tyree Wilson to Arizona, or potentially, and Arizona's interesting. You got to keep tabs away from the consensus, right? With Arizona, you have to look at 2 specific players: Paris Johnson, the offensive tackle from Ohio State, and Devin Witherspoon, the corner from Illinois. They love both players quite a bit. It wouldn't surprise me if he ended up being potentially a pick there and surprise everybody on draft day, especially with how that regime, it looks like the way it's going to go. It looks like there could be a lot of surprises, twists, and turns with that regime over the next several years. But, yeah, when you play it all out, Indianapolis is going to take a quarterback, a surprise there at 2 and 3. Seattle taking potentially Jalen Carter. Will Anderson potentially falls right in the lap of our Detroit Lions. And I think it's possible. And if he's there at 6, he's the pick. I mean, I would be absolutely stunned if he wasn't the pick. And if I could bet on, who the Lions would take, depending on what the odds are probably phenomenal. I would throw a couple bucks on Will Anderson just because I think crazy things are going to happen on Thursday.
Oh, shit.
Because I got to speak to a couple defensive coaches, and they had concerns of how he translates to the pros as an elite edge rusher, and then talked about the tape on him this past year, and a lot of it's him rushing inside and playing some defensive tackle, and they mentioned that he threw on a couple of pounds. He said that may have been a plus for him, though, to show that he was a team guy in doing so. But are there concerns with Will Anderson at the NFL level? It kind of blows my mind because he had a step back in production overall, but still had 10 sacks last year. I don't know, that one just doesn't click to me. But when I hear it from people like that, I guess I kind of have to take it for what it is,
Yeah, no, I mean, you can definitely see some regression in play, just simply because he was a little bit more neutralized at times, and I think a lot of that is just teams would bring over a tight end, an H-back, they would combo him a little bit more, and that's going to happen. But when you go to the NFL level, and when you look at that team, sure, one of his teammates was DJ Dale. Sure, Dallas Turner is going to be a player on the opposite side of him that we're going to talk about probably this coming year. But at the end of the day, he was the best player on that team, and teams schemed for him. But if you put him in a place like Detroit, or even if you put him in a place like Houston, I mean, there's just going to be NFL talent around him across the board, and you're not going to be able to just simply focus on him, because if you do, you're going to open up so much on the opposite side. And with Will Anderson, I think he's being completely overlooked and completely overthought. And when you watch a player that can transition speed to power, he's got the lung to consistently create separation. He uses that long arm technique to drive the opposition into the pocket. I mean, the production speaks for itself. And when you look at just the number of total pressures he's had in his career, 174, I mean, that's ridiculous. So to sit here and try to speculate and say, hey, no, he's going to go to 6 or 7, he's going to fall on draft day, I think it's crazy. And I feel like the same thing kind of happened with Nick Bosa when he came out and he went to San Francisco. So ultimately, I think Anderson goes 2, and I think it's to Houston.
Oh, man. That hurts my heart. It really does. But
I know.
We've heard a lot of different things going on, and Easy talked about Tyree Wilson being the second best betting option for number 2. The best betting option for number 2 is Will Levis, and he's shooting up draft boards where it seems that C.J. Stroud is kind of falling down because of, I don't remember the test they did where he was the lowest scored quarterback of the draft, only 18% on the test. Is there a reason for C.J. Stroud to be falling down draft boards or even potentially falling out of the top 5, which is what some people say?
I feel like if he's there at 4 for the Indianapolis Colts, he's the layup. It's a run to the podium for them. They get a quarterback that can help them win right away. He's got players around him to help him succeed with Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor. But, yeah, it's kind of crazy with Will Levis. And I posted a tweet today, and it kind of got some buzz and some traction on Will Levis flexing, and he's got the Chronicles 15-7 tattooed on his inner bicep there, and the font is similar to the font that the Houston Texans posted on a tweet of, failure is not an option, it's a necessity, and all this stuff. And the font's very similar to each other, and I just found that very interesting, and I'm trying to connect the dots and speculate that Will Levis could be the pick there at 2. And it got some traction, surprisingly. But it's one of those things where they could very well go that route. I mean, from the sounds of it, it sounds like they're kind of split. It sounds like, D'Amico Ryans wants a defensive player at 2. The rest of the front office really wants the quarterback because it's the biggest position of need, and it's obviously the ticket that you need to be a successful franchise. And I think they understand that. And I think with Will Levis, it's when you put on his 2021 tape, you can see the QB1 traits. You can see a player that, and I've often said this, when you watch him put it all together with his lower body, with his base and his footwork to his shoulders and the way he delivers the football, he looks like Matthew Stafford. And I only say that because, we as Detroit fans have watched Matthew Stafford more than anybody. And I look at it and I say, man, that guy can be somewhat like him in a poor man's way. But he's tough as nails, and teams love that. And I could see Houston doing it. But at the end of the day, I'm leaning towards defense. I think D'Amico is going to say, look, we got all these picks. We can try to get 12, get up to 7 or 8, and potentially get our quarterback that way, whether it's Anthony Richardson, Will Levis if he's there, or potentially C.J. Stroud.
Russ, I appreciate you taking the time to join us, man. Make sure you guys keep up the Russ on his Twitter. The handle will be on the TV screen when we get back. But real quick before I let you go, if you were Jamison Williams, you wanted to place a bet on the Detroit Lions draft pick, who would it be this Thursday?
I would love to see his betting history just to see what he was betting on. Was it all favorites parlayed together or what? But I think ultimately, I'm so torn. But if I had to bet, I would have to say Devin Witherspoon, just simply because of the way it's kind of transitioned over recent weeks. But like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if I saw Devin Witherspoon as the 3rd overall pick to the Arizona Cardinals. It really wouldn't. So I think if that happens, I think it could alter some boards for Detroit. And I think, that's where I think the conversation for Christian Gonzalez and Peter Skoronski comes in.
Don't you speak that Skoronski in existence, Russ. I'm going to be really upset. I'm punching cards that happens, man.
I could go over a trade down scenario as well, but I know we're up against it. So,
hey, do you want to stick out? You want to stick through the break? You got to go get going.
I got a coffee in my hand. The floor is yours, fellas. It's
right.
Draft week, baby.
Beautiful.
Before we left, Russ, you were teasing us with a little bit of a trade down scenario for the Detroit Lions. Now, we heard some news come out today about pick 18, but are you referring to pick 6 with this trade down scenario?
I got a couple here, and I wrote an article for the Lions Wire a few weeks back about potential trade down candidates. One being, potentially Detroit trading down with the Philadelphia Eagles. I go over, some capital that would involve, potentially a 2023 third round pick, a 2024 third round pick. They would swap the 6th pick for the 10th pick. And simply that's because Jalen Carter's on the board and the Eagles might look to make that splash. Now, that's all fun and fine, whatever. But the one that really caught my eye as I researched this, and again, when I looked at this, I did look at 6 and 18. For 18, I put potentially the Lions trying to trade up, maybe from 18 to 14 with New England. Just simply because, as we know, New England's always a wild card. We always know that they could trade down, something like that. But at the same time, the one that when I really connect dots is the Tennessee Titans. And the reason why I say that is because if there is a quarterback that falls, Tennessee's done the homework on the quarterbacks. And the best part about it is the Titans general manager that was hired this year, Rand Carthen. He was in the Rams organization and he and Brad Holmes worked together from 2012 to 2016. Carthen was, director of player personnel from 2012 to 2016. Brad Holmes was the director of college scouting with the Rams from 2013 to 2020. Carthen goes to the 49ers. Obviously, Holmes comes here. But obviously, the two worked hand in hand. So if there is a quarterback to fall, and the Titans are intrigued enough to move up to get one, they only have 6 picks, but I think there's some potential there, especially if, like I said, the board goes the way it does, where Devin Witherspoon's gone at 3, Anderson's gone at 2, Jalen Carter's gone at 5. Do they settle with Tyree Wilson at 6? Very possible. Or if they want to, change the board around, they want to move back to 11, they could get some draft capital. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic of the draft, and I'm very curious if maybe those two, if they don't work together on day 1 of the draft, is it day 2 of the draft? I think when you connect the dots, there's a lot there between Brad Holmes and Rand Carthen.
And a lot of people have been high on Bijan Robinson to the Lions. You are very high on him as a prospect in this draft and where he ranks. Where could you see him falling in this first round? Because some people are saying Philly, some people say he might go top 10. Like, where do you see Bijan Robinson falling in that first round of the draft?
Well, I think he's going to end up going anywhere between, it wouldn't surprise me if I'm sounding crazy. I know I sound crazy, but when you look at what Brad Holmes was in when he was in LA, they took Todd Gurley in 2015 at 10. Could you see Bijan at 6? It's very possible. He doesn't dismiss the idea of taking a running back, especially one that talented. He justifies the reasons for Gurley. You can justify the reasons for Bijan Robinson. I think the days of DeAndre Swift are numbered in Detroit. I think personally they could be looking at doing an in-season trade like they did with T.J. Hawkinson if he can't stay healthy. And I personally don't think they want to pay him. He's due for a contract extension anyways. They're not going to want to pay him. He can't stay healthy. So I think it would make sense for Bijan at 6. Sounds crazy, but ultimately I think the teams that make the most sense, Atlanta at 8, Philadelphia at 10, and really Chicago at 9, just because of you pair him up with Justin Fields, the rushing attack there. The Bears haven't taken a first-round running back, especially one out of Texas, since 2005 with Cedric Benson. So we could potentially see something there. I think it's very interesting, and I think ultimately 6, 8, 9, 10 could be very much landing spots for Bijan.
Russ, I don't think you're crazy. I don't think you're crazy at all. I think listening to Brad Helms speak about the position last week, he almost got excited about it, and almost like put up like a defense wall in case it were to happen, before the draft even took place. And I agree with you too. They took Todd Gurley, number 10, back in L.A. And Bijan, you say what you want about taking running backs the first round. When they do, they typically pan out. I'm talking about the Saquon Barkleys, the Christian McCaffreys, they produce. And Jared Goff, the best version you've seen with them was with that number 10 overall pick running back in Todd Gurley. So I'm with you on that one. But real quick to the defensive side of the ball, is there anything else that's coming out about Jalen Carter that we don't know? Like the interesting comments that Dan Campbell made, like what is it that's got him falling down the draft board besides what's been public? Is there anything else coming out?
I will answer this. I will just piggyback off of what you said as far as Bijan. To add to that even further, we already know about JMO, 6 games, things like that. Steve Sarkisian and the Texas coaching staff came out and said that Bijan was their best pass catcher out of all the wide receivers. They would align him in the slot. Over 2 seasons, he played 70 snaps between the slot and outside as a receiver. I think it's a fun dynamic when you look at, losing JMO for 6 games. This might be an alternative for those 6 games. He comes back. DeAndre Swift gets shopped. It's crazy, but it's very possible. And I think when you think a little bit deeper into it, it makes a lot of sense. But with Jalen Carter to that point, really, the only reason why he fell down these boards to begin with was because of what happened back in January. And there were some off-the-field incidents before, back in September. He had a speeding ticket back like September 15th, if I remember correctly. And he was kind of given a freebie on that one. The guy gave him 3 tickets. No misdemeanor charges, no nothing like that, nothing on his license. He just had to appear on court. I believe he had to appear on court on Halloween, and he ended up doing all of that stuff, getting that taken care of, and then a few months later, he ended up getting in trouble, obviously a little bit more severe this time, and a lot more things were involved. But it's one of those things where the biggest question mark is obviously how are you carrying yourself off the field, and really do you love football? A lot of scouts are saying that they've heard that Georgia had to get him in shape. They had to really worry about him constantly, and that there was a lot of red flags. And there's people in that organization or within that program that are glad that he's moving on to the next level. They think he's a heck of a player, but there's a lot of speculation that glad that the red flag is gone. And there's a lot of red flags there. So, and that's my concern with them is if you can't stay in, I mean, you got football for 5-6 months out of the year. You got 5 or 6 other months to, live your daily life. Are you going to do what you're supposed to do? And I struggle with that when I look at Jalen Carter, and that's why if we took him at 6, cool, it makes sense. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to be there, and ultimately, I don't think we take him.
Damn, that hurts.
That was deep.
That would make sense if all of those, things are true about him not being in shape or being forced to get in shape. That's not a Dan Campbell guy. It's not a Brad Holmes type guy that is solely invested in football. But before you got into that, you did mention the Jameson Williams missing 6 games because of his suspension this year. Does that change what the Lions are going to do receiver-wise in this draft? I mean, my thought process is I would draft a receiver every year. Like, just draft one of them every year. If he works out, bet. If he doesn't, you got a practice squad guy. Where do you see them going receiver in this draft? Because I feel like now with not only Jameson Williams gone for 6 games, but cutting Quintez Cephas, he's a depth piece, but it's still a piece. They need somebody to put in that receiver rotation. Where could you see them grabbing one this year?
I think they'll definitely draft one. I think if anything, it'll be later in the draft. I mean, I could certainly see day 3 of the drafts for sure. Maybe a player like Charlie Jones from Purdue, just simply because he was really productive this past year, really seems to love the game of football, and he's been around for a while. He played at Buffalo, he transferred to Iowa, ended up transferring to Purdue and kind of figuring it out there. But he's one of those players that consistently got better as a football player, and I think that's a guy that Dan Campbell would, one, respect and love and want to have a part of his organization. But really, the 3 players that I think that they could very well target: Cedric Tillman, wide receiver out of Tennessee. There's not a true X receiver in this draft, and had he not dealt with a high ankle sprain in 2022, Cedric Tillman would be a potential wide receiver 1 in this draft, and I think a first-round lock.
Wow.
But at 6'3", 213 pounds, he ran a 4.5 340. He checks off a lot of boxes, and when you look for an X receiver, teams look for him every single year. I think Detroit could very well be in that market. They've been connected to Tennessee from Darnell Wright to Hendon Hooker. I think Cedric Tillman makes a lot of sense at pick 48 or 55. So I think he makes a lot of sense. Now, if they don't go that route, I think Jonathan Mingo from Ole Miss is a name worth keeping tabs on. Kind of has that DK Metcalf body type, 6'2", 220 pounds, comes from Ole Miss, had a 4.4 640, had a 39.5-inch vertical jump, but he's a player that's very versatile. He's a guy that had over 256 snaps in the slot, 456 snaps out wide. He had 130 snaps in line. He's a guy that moves around. And when you think about Ben Johnson, versatile chess piece, he'd be fun. And then just lastly, for the hometown crowd, Spartan Dogs out there, Jaden Reed, how can you not love him? They've met with him. They brought him in for a visit. I think potentially in round 3, he could make a lot of sense. He's got great tracking ability, 147 receptions during his Spartan career. I thought he was somebody that crushed the Senior Bowl. I think at 81, potentially, Jaden Reed, if he's there, the 81st pick of the draft, I think could be a great pick.
Hell yeah.
Russ, man, I appreciate you joining in. Make sure you guys follow Russ at Russ NFL Draft. And then before Spinny tells us about Big Boy, real quick, speed around your top 5 off your big board.
The top 5 players?
Yeah.
Or just the top 5 picks of the draft?
Do both. Why not?
All right, top 5 players. At 1, Will Anderson, edge out of Alabama. 2, Bijan Robinson, running back out of Texas. 3, Bryce Young, quarterback out of Alabama. 4, Jalen Carter, interior defensive lineman out of Georgia. And 5, Miles Murphy, edge out of Clemson. And I will say, you can check out my big board and my entire draft guide for absolutely free over at fantasypros.com. It's free to download. Page 2 of the draft guide, there's some stuff in there about charity, giving back to the Wounded Warriors Project, Ronald McDonald House Charities, giving back to the people that need it most. So if you want to Venmo me or PayPal me beer money, I appreciate it, but please send that money there. But yeah, ultimately, top 5 of the draft, I'm going to say Will Anderson goes 2. Bryce Young's obviously going 1 to Carolina. Will Anderson at 2. Arizona, we're going to go 3. Let's spice it up a little bit. Let's say Devin Witherspoon, corner out of Illinois. 4, C.J. Stroud to Indianapolis. 5, Jalen Carter to Seattle.
Damn, Russ.
Cutting deep. Hey, appreciate it as always, brother. And if you guys haven't already, follow Russ at Russ NFL Draft.